Usually, when we talk about learning a new language, there's this assumption that you're like doing construction.
Yeah.
You're building a brick wall. The vocabulary words are your bricks. The grammar rules are your mortar.
Yeah, exactly.
And you just, you memorize them, you stack them up, and you hope the whole thing is structurally sound enough to just stand on its own.
It really treats language like an engineering problem,
Totally.
Like you have to analyze the structural load, you apply the mortar, you lay the brick. I mean, it's this very output-focused process where you basically try to assemble sentences mechanically.
Yeah, you study the rules, you open your mouth, and you attempt to construct the sentence in real time, which is, frankly, exhausting.
Oh, incredibly exhausting.
It's so visible and highly active. But welcome to today's deep dive, by the way, where we are going to explore a concise but powerful set of source notes that honestly completely shatters that whole brick wall metaphor.
It really does. It flips the entire model upside down.
Right. The notes we have in front of us prove that almost everything we were taught in typical language classes is just fundamentally backward.
Yeah, the central claim in this deep dive is massive. This research argues that listening is the single most important skill.
The single most important.
Period. And not just in acquiring a new language, but actually in mastering everyday personal communication, too.
Wow.
It elevates listening from this, passive background activity to the primary driver of all linguistic capability.
And the notes don't just throw this bold idea out there and walk away. They actually break down the exact biological and psychological mechanics of it.
Right, they get into the science.
Yeah, they show how listening naturally drives the acquisition of vocabulary, the mapping of complex grammar, the physical ability to pronounce words, and perhaps most surprisingly, the organic development of confidence.
Which is huge for language learners.
Yeah. Huge. So our mission today is to explore the neurological science behind this, the practical habits required to make it work, and why keeping things simple is the ultimate key to success for you, the learner. Okay, let's unpack this. Because assigning this level of absolute dominance to listening over speaking, it feels completely contrary to how adult learners usually operate.
It does. But to understand that dominance, we really have to look at the cognitive science underpinning the concept of the receptive phase.
The receptive phase. Got it.
Right. So before you can produce anything, before you can speak or write, your brain requires massive amounts of data input. Listening is the primary vehicle for that input.
Makes sense.
When you hear a foreign language for the first time, it doesn't sound like individual words. It sounds like a single, unbroken stream of noise.
Oh, yeah, just complete gibberish.
Exactly. And your brain is desperately trying to do incredibly complex neurological work just to make sense of the chaos.
Because, people don't speak with convenient little spaces between their words.
No, they don't. So the brain has to decode these acoustic signals, figure out where one word ends and the next begins, which linguists call identifying word boundaries, and then it has to assign arbitrary meaning to those specific sounds.
That sounds like a lot of work.
It takes tremendous processing power.
I was thinking about this, like a kitchen sponge.
Ooh, a sponge. I like that.
Yeah, like think about a brand new bone-dry sponge. It's actually surprisingly water resistant.
It is, yeah.
If you just run a quick splash of water over it, the water just beads up and rolls right off. It takes sustained, slow exposure to the water to actually soften those fibers.
Right.
The actual physical structure of the sponge has to change before it can absorb anything, let alone retain it.
That physical change in the sponge is a perfect representation of what's happening in your neural pathways.
Really?
Yeah, the brain has to be saturated with input. It literally has to physically rewire its auditory processing centers to accommodate these new sounds.
But in language classes, we are constantly told to squeeze the dry sponge.
Yes, every single day.
The teacher's always like, repeat after me, say this phrase. But we haven't softened the fibers yet. We haven't absorbed the underlying data.
And so you squeeze as hard as you can, you get frustrated, you strain yourself.
And we wonder why it feels so forced and why we completely forget the phrase like 5 minutes later.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this principle of saturation applies far beyond just memorizing foreign vocabulary.
How so?
Well, these notes specifically link the mechanics of listening and language learning to listening in everyday personal communication. Being a good listener doesn't merely decode a new language. It fundamentally alters how we connect with human beings in our native tongue.
Oh, wow. How often are we actually listening to understand versus just listening to reply.
That is the exact trap of the output-focused model.
Right.
In personal communication, if you are busy formulating your response while the other person is still talking, which is the conversational equivalent of squeezing the dry sponge, by the way, you are missing the nuance.
You're just waiting for your turn to speak.
Right. You miss the shift in their tone, the slight hesitation, the underlying emotional meaning of what they are actually sharing. The foundational skill of deep, receptive listening builds empathy in our native language just as effectively as it builds vocabulary in a target language.
That changes the whole dynamic. You stop treating a conversation as a performance where you have to, like, deliver your lines perfectly, and you start treating it as an act of reception.
Exactly. But treating a conversation as reception leaves people wondering something pretty important.
Which is?
If I'm only receiving, how do I actually build my own sentences?
Right, which is where I have to push back a little bit on this research.
Okay, let's hear it.
The notes claim that listening allows learners to acquire vocabulary and grammar naturally. Now, I can understand absorbing some vocabulary by hearing words repeated in context. That makes sense. But grammar...
You're skeptical.
I am. Wait, grammar is all about strict rules and structural formulas. It's irregular verb conjugations, it's past participles, it's gendered noun declensions. Can you really just absorb grammar naturally just by listening without ever opening a textbook and memorizing a conjugation chart?
It really feels like you shouldn't be able to, doesn't it?
It totally does.
We are so heavily conditioned by the classroom model to believe that grammar equals textbook drills. But what's fascinating here is the sheer computing power of natural acquisition. To understand the mechanism, let's just look at how human beings actually learn their first language. Think about a toddler.
Well, a toddler isn't sitting down with a whiteboard to study the rules of the past continuous tense.
They definitely aren't. And yet they learn to speak with virtually perfect grammar without ever knowing what a verb is.
That's a really good point. How do they do that?
They do this through statistical learning.
Statistical learning.
Yeah. The brain is the ultimate pattern recognition machine. When a child hears the words walked, talked, and played thousands of times in contexts where an action is already finished, their brain runs a subconscious probability algorithm.
Oh, I see. So it notices that the ed sound at the end of a word consistently correlates with an event in the past.
Yes, it maps out those rules automatically. And here's the best part. This statistical learning capability doesn't just vanish when we grow up.
It doesn't.
Not at all. When you expose yourself to continuous listening in a new language, your adult brain starts to intuitively feel what sounds right and what sounds wrong.
Kind of like when someone says a sentence in English with the wrong word order, and you don't even have to think about the grammar rule, you just know it's wrong.
Exactly. You don't need to memorize a tedious chart to know how to conjugate a French verb if you've heard that specific verb used correctly in context 500 times. The grammatical structure is acquired effortlessly rather than through forced rote memorization.
Man, that takes an incredible amount of pressure off the learner.
Huge amount of pressure.
You don't have to act like a structural engineer agonizing over the blueprints of a sentence before you speak. You just have to be an active observer and let the data compile itself.
Plus, this contextual mapping is far more robust under pressure than rote memorization.
How so?
Well, when you memorize a grammar rule from a book, you have to consciously recall that specific rule in a fraction of a second during a live conversation. Your brain has to frantically search its filing cabinet.
And usually that's when you freeze up.
Right. But when you acquire grammar naturally through pattern recognition, it becomes an instinct. It operates entirely automatically.
So we've naturally absorbed the vocabulary through context. We've subconsciously mapped the grammar through statistical pattern recognition. The foundation is set.
Yes, the foundation is there.
But eventually you do have to move from the receptive phase to the active phase. I mean, you have to physically execute the language, and this is where the research brings in pronunciation. Here's where it gets really interesting for me.
Oh yeah, because of how auditory processing dictates physical movement.
Yes. Because learning to pronounce words in a new language feels a lot like a musician learning to tune an instrument by ear.
That's a great analogy.
Think about it. If a musician cannot truly hear the pitch, if their ear isn't trained to recognize that specific frequency, they cannot physically adjust their instrument to play it correctly.
Right, they wouldn't even know what they were aiming for.
Exactly. They will always be out of tune no matter how skilled their hands are.
The auditory processing must precede the physical execution.
The exact same mechanism applies to the human vocal cords. Every language has unique sounds, unique vowels and consonants, or specific intonations that simply do not exist in your native language.
Right.
If you try to speak before you've done the listening, your brain encounters a sound it doesn't recognize. And instead of creating a new category for it, your brain just throws that foreign sound into the closest native bucket it already has.
Which is why an English speaker might hear the rolled R in Spanish and subconsciously categorize it as a hard D sound.
Yes. You physically cannot pronounce a sound correctly if your ear hasn't first learned to truly isolate and hear it. Your brain is literally lying to you about what you just heard.
That is wild.
It is. Listening acts as the literal blueprint for pronunciation. You have to listen to the new sounds long enough for your brain to build a brand new neurological bucket for them. Once you can actually hear the difference between two subtle vowel sounds, tuning the instrument like adjusting the muscles in your mouth and throat becomes exponentially easier.
And that physical tuning directly feeds into the psychological aspect of communication.
Oh, the confidence part.
Yes. The notes make a brilliant connection here, linking pronunciation and listening directly with confidence. This raises an important question. Why do people feel such intense, paralyzing anxiety when trying to speak a new language?
Yeah, oh man, it is absolute dread, the feeling of being called on in language class, your palms start sweating, your mind goes entirely blank.
We've all been there, and that anxiety stems from a severe lack of foundation. You're being asked to perform a high-wire act without a safety net.
Yeah, that's exactly what it feels like.
If you are relying on rote memorization, you are simultaneously trying to recall vocabulary from a mental dictionary, calculate grammar rules like a math equation, and force your mouth to make unfamiliar physical shapes.
That's just too much at once.
Cognitive overload is guaranteed.
It all goes back to the teacher demanding that you squeeze the dry sponge. There is no water there to give.
Perfectly said. But the research points out that true confidence is entirely organic. It cannot be faked through sheer willpower.
You can't just tell yourself to be confident.
Exactly. It blooms naturally when a learner has spent enough time in the receptive phase. When you have familiarized yourself with the rhythm of the language, the cadence, the way the words naturally blur together at the boundaries, the anxiety just dissipates.
Because the guessing game is over. You aren't desperately trying to invent the language from scratch in real time.
Right. You have the safety net of familiarity. You have heard the language enough times that you trust your own statistical learning instincts. You know how the sentence is supposed to sound? So opening your mouth to speak no longer feels like a leap into the unknown.
That makes so much sense.
Confidence isn't a personality trait in this context.
Yeah.
It is the natural, inevitable byproduct of massive auditory input.
Okay, so we've covered the theoretical framework. We understand the cognitive science of the receptive phase. We see how subconscious pattern mapping replaces rote memorization, and how the ear tunes the vocal cords to build organic confidence.
Right, all the theory is there.
This is incredibly compelling, but surely I can't just, put on a Spanish news broadcast at double speed while I do the dishes.
No, definitely not.
Right. If I don't understand 90% of it, it's just white noise. So what does this all mean in terms of execution? How do we actually curate what we listen to?
Well, a philosophy without a practice is just an idea. And the notes are adamant about moving from this neurological theory into a very specific, actionable application. You cannot passively listen to incomprehensible noise and expect your brain to map the grammar. The listening must be intentional, and the input must be carefully calibrated.
Okay. And the research specifically points to building daily habits, right? Carving out dedicated time, maybe 20 minutes a day, where focused listening is your only task.
Yes, but the crucial detail is what you are listening to during those 20 minutes.
What should it be?
The research dictates that the learning environment must be friendly, motivational, and utilize simple language, specifically targeting the B1 to B2 intermediate level.
Let's explore why that specific intermediate level is the golden ticket.
Because it proves that complexity is the enemy of acquisition.
Oh, I like that. Complexity is the enemy.
Exactly. A B1, B2 level means the vocabulary is highly accessible, the grammatical structures are common, and the speaker isn't using obscure idioms or academic jargon. It is comprehensible input.
So when the input is just slightly above your current level, but still highly understandable through context, your brain can relax.
Yes, relax is the key word.
It isn't panicking trying to translate every single dense word. It can focus on the broader message, the tone, and the natural flow.
And keeping the brain relaxed is biologically essential because of something called the affective filter.
Okay, I want to make sure we understand the mechanics of this. The effective filter is a psychological barrier, right?
Yes.
And when it's high, you say the brain physically blocks input. What does it mean that it physically blocks it? Do you literally stop hearing?
Cognitively, yes.
Wait, really?
Yeah, think about it. When you are stressed, maybe because the material is way too fast, the vocabulary is too dense, or the environment is intimidating, your amygdala perceives that confusion as a literal threat.
A threat, like a predator.
Pretty much. It triggers a mild fight-or-flight response.
Hmm.
Your brain diverts metabolic energy away from the language processing centers in your prefrontal cortex and reroutes it to deal with the perceived stress.
Oh my God.
So you are physically hearing the sound waves, but the cognitive door is slammed shut. The statistical learning completely halts.
That is wild. So by keeping the material friendly, motivational, and at that sweet spot of intermediate simplicity, you are essentially tricking your amygdala into staying calm.
You're keeping the filter low.
Right. You ensure that the learner's sponge stays open and ready to absorb the data.
And, that B1, B2 sweet spot isn't just a language learning metric. It's a fundamental blueprint for effective human connection.
Yeah, think about the best communicators in the world, the leaders who truly inspire people. They almost never use the most complex academic language possible.
Well, no, they don't.
They use clear, relatable, intermediate level language. They rely heavily on real-life examples rather than abstract theories. They intentionally keep their tone accessible.
Because their primary goal isn't to impress an audience with their extensive vocabulary or structural engineering. Their goal is to be understood.
And if you want to be understood, you have to create an environment where the other person's effective filter remains low. They need to feel capable of listening to you without experiencing cognitive overload.
Exactly.
This whole concept is a brilliant reminder that we do not need to overcomplicate things to achieve mastery. The simple daily habit of listening to clear, contextual, engaging material is powerful enough to drive the entire engine of language acquisition.
It is a complete paradigm shift. Listening is not a passive activity.
Right.
We have to stop treating it like it is the lazy alternative to speaking or writing.
It is the most active, vital engine for neurological growth.
Yeah.
It is the soil from which everything else grows. You cannot naturally acquire vocabulary without it. You cannot subconsciously map out grammar rules without it. You certainly cannot tune your pronunciation or build organic confidence without it. Listening is the foundation of the entire house.
But building that foundation requires a tangible commitment. The actionable takeaway here for you is to not let this just be an interesting neurological theory that you ponder for a few minutes and then discard.
Right, you have to do the work.
Make listening a non-negotiable daily habit. Find material that is slightly challenging, but still highly understandable. Seek out voices that are friendly and motivating. Make a commitment to soak the sponge, to soften the fibers, before you ever worry about squeezing it. The results will transform how you learn.
It's entirely about changing your default setting from output to input. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over on your own.
Always the best part.
It builds on everything we've discussed today regarding the sheer power of reception. We talked about how listening requires an open, calm mind to map patterns and tune the ear. But look at your own daily interactions. If listening is truly the ultimate biological key to acquiring new languages, and if it is the master key to deepening personal communication, perhaps the greatest barrier to our learning isn't a lack of study materials. It isn't a lack of time or bad textbooks or difficult grammar rules. Perhaps the real barrier is our inability to quiet our own internal monologue long enough to truly hear what's being said. You can't listen to the world if you're constantly talking to yourself.